this needs to be shared with other people, right? This is it's so well written for a 15-year-old girl. It's got some really great lessons in it. And I knew that if I put it out here on YouTube, it would be the best chance for people to get this message and hear her words. And as long as I can get through it and you understand that it's going to be, tough. Hey, Wid fam, this is Leo with One Happy Widow, and we've got some catching up to do, don't we? So if you haven't watched my videos before, if you're new to this channel, then welcome and thank you for joining in. I'm a widow. I lost my husband back in 2017, so it's been over 6 years now. He had cancer, and since then, I've tried to make sense of everything that has happened in my life, trying to find meaning and purpose in my life and actually try to live a happy life with the time that I've been gifted that he wasn't able to get since he died. I've also tried to share some of my experiences with people on YouTube, on my website, and things like that. So, in my Facebook group, to try to help others, just to let other people know that they're not alone. Because I always felt like that I was going on this journey by myself. I always wondered if I was doing it right. Am I grieving right? I don't know how to do this. Nobody's written like a workbook on a how-to book on how to be a widow. So kind of learn as we go, right? And so I'm not a counselor or a doctor. I'm not an expert. I'm just a person who's been through what you've probably been through if you're watching this video. And I've just shared my experiences, good, bad, and other, kind of put myself out there and tried to help people in a way just to let you know that if you're feeling a certain way or thinking a certain thing, that other people probably have too. And so that seems to help people feel a little bit better sometimes. What I want to talk about today is, like, some people have been asking me about parenting. With your children, especially children that are minors, if they're still at home and you're still raising your kids and your kids have lost a parent. So I've had some questions. Some people ask me how should I act, as far as my grief around my children. And so I will tell you what I did, but I'm going to tell you don't do what I did. Okay. So I'll explain how my thought process and how I acted with my grief with my kids in the early days, and why, if I had to do it all over again, some of the changes that I would make. Specifically, I did have one member say, she messaged me and she said, I have not been crying in front of my children because I don't want to make them feel bad. And so, how do you reconcile that? What's the thoughts on that? And so I think there's two camps of thought. Is just show all of your feelings, and act however you're going to act and let your kids, see it or act accordingly as well. Or there's another that's like, don't cry. I'm not going to cry in front of my kids because I don't want to make them feel worse and I don't want to add to their grief. And so I want to try to protect them from the pain. And so, and I want to set an example for them, etc. So I hide. I cry in the closet. I cry in the car when I'm by myself, and I cry in the shower. And, when I'm in front of my kids, I turn it off. That was kind of my camp. So what I thought was that if I cry in front of my kids, then number one, they'll think that I am weak and I won't be able to, and then I'm not handling things very well, and they might worry about me. And I don't want them to worry about me. So I wanted to try to set an example for them and say, look at mom. She's so strong. She's handling this so well. She doesn't even hardly ever cry. Like, look at her. She's getting better. She's feeling better. She's handling the grief. I want to be able to do what she's doing. She seems happy. She's laughing. She's moving forward. She's doing all of her things. Like, this grief hasn't got her down. And so if she can do it, then I can do it. So in my mind, I was like, let me set an example on how we can survive losing their dad. Anyway, that's what I thought I was doing, setting an example for them. I didn't really ask them or talk to them about it or anything. That's just how I did. And also, I grew up in that time where, you don't really show your emotions outwardly in front of people because it embarrasses people and it embarrasses them. My dad would always be like, don't cry, stop crying, and everybody's looking at you, So it was almost like if you needed to cry, you go off somewhere else and you cry privately. You don't cry in front of people. whether you're a girl or a boy or whatever. And so I kind of grew up with that mentality taught to me. And so that's kind of what I carried forward. Well, anyway, looking back and talking to my kids now that they're older, like 3 of my kids are grown now. They were all kids at home when my husband died, but 3 of them are grown and moved out. I only have 1 left at home. So in talking with them now and looking back, specifically, my one daughter said, Mom, I don't hardly ever remember seeing you cry when Daddy died. And I said, yeah, no, I didn't really want to cry in front of y'all. I wanted to, I just cried in private or whatever. And she's like, well, I never knew you were crying in private. And she said, all I could think was that, wow, Mom's not even crying. Like, does she even care that Daddy died? Does it even matter to her? Look at her. She's over there laughing and having a good time. And she's like going about her day like nothing's even happening. Did she already forget about him? Does she even care? And so here my kids were struggling, especially this child that I had this conversation with, especially her. And it actually made her mad at me, and it gave her animosity, and it made her think that the death of her dad did not affect me hardly at all, especially the way that it affected her. And so instead of me trying to, what I thought was setting an example, all I was doing was giving her this message that Mom didn't care that Dad had died. And of course I cared. Of course it was, hard for me. And I was trying to grieve, and I was grieving. I was trying to raise these kids by myself. I'm trying to figure out how to pay the bills until the life insurance came in. I was trying to build this house later on. I had a full-time job. I was trying to hold down a job. Like, I'm just trying to survive. And here my child is looking at me thinking that Mom doesn't even care that Daddy just died. And so it made her have a lot of animosity towards me on top of the grief, because then when she didn't want to share her grief with me because she felt like I didn't care. She felt like if I don't care that he died, why would I care that she's sad about it? And so I really wish that I had handled things differently, but I had no idea that's what she thought. I thought I was doing the right thing. Turns out that I wasn't. Don't be afraid to cry in front of your kids. That's my opinion. Okay. Do you. But if I was going to do it all over again, I feel like it would have done more good for my kids if I had allowed myself to have those moments of grief and show my vulnerability and show my feelings and cry when I felt like crying and smile when I felt like smiling, and just be more authentic with what my feelings were instead of trying to cover them up. And then maybe we could have all felt like more like we were in this together and we were helping each other through it, rather than there goes Mom doing her thing, leaving us back here to try to, handle Dad's death, and she doesn't even care, which is totally not the case. But that's the message that they were getting from me, or at least she was. And I just wish I had done things differently. So for the person or the people who are wondering, should I cry in front of my kids or should I just not? I would say, like if you are at that point where you can't get out of bed, and you can't function, you want to show some moderation, right? But and another thing is you want to let your kids know that it's okay to cry. Like if they see Mom crying when she's really sad, then they are like, oh, okay, so that's what you do. Like kids are learning how to act based on what you do. You don't just teach them with your words, you teach them with your actions. So if you can show your kids that, sometimes I feel so sad that I want to cry, and so I do. That just sends them the message that if they feel like they're so sad sometimes that they want to cry, that they can, then it's okay. So they won't feel like they have to hold their feelings in and not express those emotions when they feel them, when they're overwhelming. Because it's not healthy to hold all of your stuff inside, right? And so on the on the other side of it, it also is teaching your children how to express their emotions in a healthy way, instead of holding everything inside. Because let me tell you, if you hold it all inside, eventually it's going to come back on you. You're going to blow up anyway. So you don't want your kids trying to hold all that stuff in. And, you don't want to teach them that it's not okay to cry when you really need to. And then the other part of this video that I want to go ahead and give a trigger warning, because my daughter, who's now 21, same one that I've been talking about, she texted me the other day. She was 15 when her dad died. She's 21 now. And she texted me and she was like, hey, I just found something. I found something that I wrote a few weeks after Daddy died when I was 15. I found this essay that I wrote. And she said, I don't know if it was for school or if it was just for myself or a diary entry, whatever. She said, but I want to share it with you because I don't even remember writing it, and reading it kind of took me back there. And she said, I just want to share it with you. I was like, okay. So she sent it to me, and it's kind of long, but I read it, and let me tell you, and I'm gonna read it to you, and I'll tell you why. But as I was reading it, it took me right back to that time. And it was very emotional. So if I get to reading this, just so you know, this is, get your tissues out, because it's like, I'm going to try to read it without crying. Okay. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to work. So I'm just hoping I can read it. If I start crying, that you'll still be able to understand me. Okay. So that's my goal. She sent it to me, and I read it, and it probably took me 10 minutes to read it. And, I started thinking about how the things that she was describing, I was thinking, I remember that, I remember that situation. I remember that scenario. But the funny thing is, it opened my eyes because I thought, I remember it from my point of view. I remember it, what I was going through in that situation as the wife, as the mom. She lived through the same situation, the same scenario as the kid who was losing her dad. And so this is common sense, right? But like sometimes you don't even think about things that are common sense until it hits you upside the head. But it just opened my eyes to realize that, like, even if I'm remembering it accurately, okay, it's still through the lens of me, the wife, the one who's about to become widowed, the mom who's trying to get through with the kids. I'm not seeing it through the lens of a child who's losing her dad, who's about to be without him for the rest of her life and doesn't even understand what that really means at the time, even though she's 15. And so I'm like, wow, this sounds like a whole different story, even though it's the same guy, it's the same disease, it's the same person, it's the same family, it's the same situation. All of it's the same. It's the same scene, right? But from a different camera. And so it just made me realize that, we might have lost the same person, but we lost a different type of a figure in our life, and how the grieving process is different for her than it is for me. And not one over the other, not worse or better. I'm not comparing, like who is hurting more. It's nothing to do with that. It's just all about how your life has changed differently because of the person that you've lost. Like losing a spouse is different from losing a parent. Losing a parent is different from losing a kid, different from losing a sister, different from losing a friend, different, it's like, it's still a loss. And for her, it's still a huge secondary loss, which there's a video about secondary loss that I've made that if you want to watch about that, but it's still affecting her life in a different way because of the role that he played in her life. And so it was just so interesting to me to read this same story from a different point of view. This needs to be shared with other people, right? This is it's so well written for a 15-year-old girl. It's got some really great lessons in it. And I knew that if I put it out here on YouTube, it would be the best chance for people to get this message and hear her words. And as long as I can get through it and you understand that it's going to be, tough. I do want you to hear it because I want you to understand that you probably have heard some of these stories from me, from my perspective. So now just know that this is a story from her perspective, and how when you look at your kids and you think about what they're going through, maybe it'll give you a better understanding of, just try to look at things from their lens and ask them what they need to see if you could help them. If you have, thoughts, reactions, or anything like that, post them in the description below so that I can know what you think about this. And if you have any messages for Braylon herself, I will be sure to share any of them with her. All right. I lost my dad 3 weeks ago. It was heartbreaking. It still is. He was my best friend, the person who understood me the most, the man I was molding my boyfriends to be just like. He was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer on Valentine's Day of 2017. Yet he never drank. Alcohol hadn't poisoned his body, but he still ended up the same way the people who abuse it do. He didn't deserve his punishment, but it was sentenced to him anyway. He lived knowing about that cancer for 3 months. My younger siblings never knew. Daddy is just sick, is what I had to tell my 7-year-old sister, who I knew would never grasp the concept of the disease that had taken my father as its victim. I constantly told myself that he was going to get better. This is just something the family would have to tough out and get over in the next year. Then the day came where I overheard my grandmother say the words 11 months on the phone, and I knew exactly what she meant. The day after my dad told me he had cancer, he took me to go look at some really nice big houses. At the time, I didn't know why we were taking this trip, but I went along. He showed me around the insides of these places that looked like mansions to me. We ran around and left the lights on and picked what rooms would be ours if we lived there. There was a long driveway that led to the house, and I watched him as he carefully measured out if it would fit a basketball court for me to practice on. That was our thing, basketball. He came to every one of my games. It was his dream to see me play varsity basketball. I sometimes blame myself that not being very good led to one of his dreams never coming true. He lived to see me play. The girls on the team made fun of him because he wore a jersey with my number on it everywhere we played, and he was one of the loudest people in the small crowd that even showed up to the girls' basketball games. I inherited his number, 33, and I am more than proud to have that. The day when he was showing me houses, I had no idea he was planning out our life for when he was gone. He wanted to buy us a house so bad, and he never got the chance to do it. He was in the military for 14 years, so moving was just something that came along with the territory. I felt this guilt build inside me soon after that day when we danced in the living room of a house that we would never see again. I felt like I had to live this crazy, awesome life with him because he only had 11 months left. That was almost impossible. For about 2 weeks, me and my dad were out and about everywhere. If he went to the grocery store, I went too. If he wanted to go play basketball, I damn sure went. He was admitted into the hospital at one point for 2 weeks. I stayed with him and missed 4 days of school within that time period. The school sent a letter home that said if I missed another day, I would have to stay in ISS, in school suspension, or some other ridiculous punishment. The days I spent with him in that hospital were some of the most fun I ever had. We ordered $150 worth of cookies, cupcakes, and fudge pops in one night. He wrote all his nurses' names down and memorized them in a week. He even hand-delivered them cookies one night, and they had to tell him to go back to bed. We made midnight runs down the hallway to get food from the vending machine because pudding and mystery meat from the hospital just wasn't that good. In the mornings, he showed me what the best stuff was at the breakfast bar. He spent 2 weeks there, and nobody visited him except me and my mom. That's a pretty big piece. Okay. What can you say? When he was released from the hospital, he was so excited. My mom carried his bag to the car, and he shuffled out the doors as fast as his legs could take him. He hadn't seen sunlight in 14 days. When I saw his reaction to the sun on his face, it was one of the most uplifting moments I had ever witnessed. I never realized how much I took advantage of the fact that I was free to do things when and however I pleased. Time passed quickly after this. His sickness got worse, and this is the part where I forget everything. I do remember him becoming a heavily Christian man. Very soon after this, I committed my life to Christ, and I decided to get baptized along with my sister. My dad joined us. The preacher came to our house after that and asked my father to share his testimony, which he recorded and played at the baptism. We had no idea that the cameras were rolling the entire time. He talked on and on about how he loved his family. He told our preacher that he felt like God specifically put him on the earth to be a dad. I realized very quickly he would never be able to do normal things again. He had good days occasionally at first, but he quickly turned bedridden almost always. We watched a lot of TV. He usually slept through it, and I finished 6 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. This time went by way too quickly. I would give more details, but there is nothing. I believe there is a thing where your brain purposely forgets traumatizing events in your life in order to protect you. 2 months of his and my life I can barely remember. I have documentation that it happened, but I cannot remember. I don't remember him being in very much pain, though I'm sure he was. The time I remember, even though I don't want to, was when I realized my dad was going to die. He was being transported into a hospice center. The ambulance came to pick him up, but before they took him, he said goodbye to our dog Lola. She wagged her tail as he petted her head for the last time. There were actually some of the funniest moments of his life within the last 10 days of his life. At times, his pain medicine was so high, he didn't realize where he was, and he got a little confused about basic things. He did karate in his sleep. He told me that he loved to ski, even though he had never done it in his whole life. The last 10 days of my dad's life were spent in a hospice center. He completely transformed into somebody I could barely recognize. People decided then that it was a good time to visit, as if when he was capable of doing things was a bad time. I rarely got time alone with him because people were always in his room. The day he passed away, I got the news from my mom while we were out and about. I didn't know how to feel. I was sad and angry and confused. We rode to the hospice center where he passed away, and we all went inside together. His room was at the end of the hall in the very middle. I was hesitant to enter the room. I didn't know what I was about to see. When I saw his body there in the bed, I screamed. I'm not exactly sure what happened after that, but I remember falling to the ground. I blacked out for about 30 seconds and woke up when the nurses came and picked me up to put me in a chair outside of his room. When I finally went inside, I saw him there. The rest of my family left, and I grabbed his hand and sat down in a chair next to him. I had to keep reminding myself that this wasn't him anymore, and that he couldn't hear me. I was full of emotions that flooded me all too quickly. All of a sudden, I wanted to tell him so many things. I regretted not telling him a lot of the things I should have. We had a conversation that day, even though he wasn't present. The nurse came in and started to unplug all of his medicine, which was one of the hardest things for me to watch. I told her to go to hell and to leave me alone, which took her by surprise, but earned me a few of my last minutes with my dad. When I finally parted with him, I fell asleep in the car on the way home and didn't eat for the rest of the day. 2 days later was his viewing. It was hard for me to see him lying there like that in a casket. It felt like he was just sleeping, and I could wake him up and have a conversation. I think for me, it was more traumatizing than it should have been. I felt like I wasn't allowed to cry. People I had never met showed up, and I was uncomfortable watching them mourn for a man they barely knew. I was overcome with anger that I had to suppress because that day was not about me. It was for him. The next day was his funeral. It was the last time I would ever see his face again. My sister and I ripped a paper from the back of the church seats and wrote him a note. We love you, Daddy. Austin and Braylon. I went up to his casket, placed the note on the pocket of his shirt, and went back to my seat. That was the last time I ever saw him. After his funeral, people lined up for ages to tell me the exact same phrase, as if "I'm sorry for your loss" was going to make me feel any better. I'm sorry for my loss too. I didn't know anybody who shook my hand and repeated that phrase. I had to smile and act like I was optimistic. His burial was the next day. There was a flag covering the casket, and 3 soldiers stood at the end. My mom cried when they presented the flag to her, and the rain poured down as they took him to finally lay him to rest. My father was hands down the best man I ever met. I miss him every day of my life, and I even pray that God gives me just one more day with him. I haven't had a dream that my dad is absent from yet. He is still here with me every day. I'm so thankful that I got 15 amazing years with him. I know a lot of people will not understand what I'm going through, but I want it to be known that a lesson I am trying to teach is to never take advantage of the people you love. If you love somebody, you need to go hug them and let them know how much you appreciate them. Life is so short. You can't stay mad at the people you care for. You have to realize how much you're blessed with. My dad always said, always forward. That was his saying. He ended every email with it. I believe that is what he wanted me to remember. My life will continue on, and I will live it to its fullest, and remember every day that it is what he would want to see. Always forward. From the mouth and the hands of a 15-year-old girl, within weeks of her losing her dad. She has wisdom beyond her own self, beyond her years. And, she forgot. She doesn't even remember writing that. And I will say that she had one of those delayed reactions to the grief. So, she was kind of in denial for a long time and acted like, pushed it down inside. And so it came out a little later, a few months later. And I wish she had remembered some of those lessons, because she was the one that put me through the ringer the most. While she was 16, 17, 18, she she's the one. She was daddy's girl. I mean, they were all close to their dad, but she took it probably the hardest and struggled the most at that time because of the stage of life that she was in, and she was very close to him. And boy, she took it out on me a lot. And we're very close now. She's turned into an awesome young lady. But that time when she struggled, she was angry, and I was the target, of that anger, because there was nowhere else to send it to. And so, we made it through. So she knew what she was supposed to do. Don't take people for granted, and don't take advantage of people. And the people that you have, don't waste a single day. There's great lessons in there, But it's easy to write about it when you're thinking introspectively, but it's hard to do that on a daily basis. So anyway, try to use that as a lesson. Take a lesson from a 15-year-old girl who had just lost her dad. So anyway, I don't know how else to really wrap that up, because it's hard to follow behind that. But just know that your kids are watching you, your kids are listening to you, and they think a lot more deeply than you probably realize, because they think about stuff, they process it, but they don't always know how to say it out loud. They're feeling the things, they're thinking the thoughts. They don't know how to get them out always. They don't know how to say it. They might not know how to write it, and they don't know how to express it. And so, therapy might help with that. I'm not sure, but just know that your kids are watching you, and they're learning about life. She learned about life from me, but look how much she learned from her dad in the 15 years that she had him. She learned a lot about love and having fun, and just about family from him. And so, if you have any feedback that I can share with her, just put it in the description, put it in the comments, and I'll be sure to share it with her, because I did get her permission to share it. But because, I think people just need to hear it. I needed to hear it. I'm like, I remember that time he was in the hospital for that 2 weeks, but I didn't know anything about fudge pops and cookies and brownies. I didn't know anything about nurses chasing him back to bed and all that stuff. I just know she wanted to hang with him, and I was like, no, you got school. You can't stay with him. You got school. You got to go to school. And he was like, she's staying with me. I need her, because I had to go to work. And so, he basically was like, if they want to call somebody about her missing school, tell them to come see me. Tell them to call me, and I'll tell them. And I was like, okay. So, I remember that time. I don't remember it from that point of view. I don't remember all those details, And so she said things like, I don't remember him being in a lot of pain. Well, guess what? I do, because because he was in a lot of pain. He was in terrible pain. All he did was tell me, I hurt, I hurt, I hurt. But I guess he hid that from her. He didn't tell her I hurt, because it wasn't her job to keep him, get him his medicine. And he didn't want to scare her, and he didn't want her to feel bad. And so he hid that down. He shared it with me. He shared it with his doctors and his nurses, but he didn't share it with his kids because he didn't want his kids to be upset that daddy was hurting. So it's funny. She's like, I don't remember him being in that much pain, but let me tell you, he was. So, it just goes to show you that the same story can be told so many different ways from different points of view. So I'm going to end it with that. And I am sorry for rambling, but I did want to share that with you. And thank you so much for making it this long. If you got anything out of this video and you want to see more, then hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you're notified every time a new video comes out. And we will see you next time. Bye.